Welcome to the Church of Mabus radio show. It's Friday night, 7:06 p.m. Central. You're listening to United Public Radio, 107.7 FM, New Orleans. We got Wham here with us.
Hey.
The great Wham up in Hudson Valley. And Preston Dennett. And we're going to talk about UFOs and other stuff. It's great to have you here, Preston. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Not bad. Hope you guys are too.
I'm checking out the little aliens and stuff back there. It looks like little statues or masks.
I've collected quite a few over the years.
Yeah, I collect weird stuff like that too. Like there's weird Bigfoot stuff. Like if you get on eBay and put in Bigfoot figure or something, like you get some really crazy stuff. So I try to grab some of it, not as much as I used to, but the weirder the better for sure. So what have you been up to lately? What is your newest book, and what's going on? What's the newest on everything?
Oh gosh, I mean, I keep pretty busy with this subject. Pretty much doing it full time now. My most recent books include, Symmetry, a true UFO adventure. That's about a lady by the name of Dolly Safran, who was a registered nurse, a Department of Defense employee, quite a few amazing jobs actually, lifeguard, zookeeper, who's had lifelong contact with ETs, fully conscious, by the way, not recalled through hypnosis. So it's a really extensive case, the most extensive I've ever investigated. Another recent book is Not From Here, Volume 5, which is an ongoing series covering the kind of stranger types of UFO cases, weird patterns in UFO research, sort of avenues of research that haven't been well trodden or explored a whole lot. My most recent book, I think that is it. Oh, Humanoids and High Strangeness. That's also quite recent, which is 20 cases of people who've seen humanoids, been taken on board a craft, but really embracing the whole spectrum of contact, because it's not just, when someone has contact, almost always there's paranormal stuff coming along with it. So I kind of embraced that and really tried to get the whole story, not just the ET part. And now currently working on a sequel for Symmetry, again about Dolly Safran. Going to be putting out another one about my own out-of-body experiences. Got the rights back for a few of my old books because I'm now up to, 32. So those are going to be reprinted. So yeah, I'm keeping pretty busy.
Yeah, you definitely, for sure. And what was the catalyst for all this that got you started into this subject? For me, I have an interest in trauma in this subject because I think a lot of my experiences came from trauma that I experienced. Basically, at 17, testicular cancer and had to go through chemo. And a few years later, my dad died. And I started to have a lot of weird experiences, from beings of light to UFOs with witnesses over each house I moved to. And seen some strange beings at times. I don't go around saying I was abducted, but I certainly don't rule it out either. But I believe that, that trauma and something to do with my father dying had something to do with a lot of those experiences. And it seemed like I was a beacon for it a while. Now I don't think they like me anymore, once in a while kind of thing. But but I call those my golden oldie days. But I think trauma is a big part of why I had mine. I've talked to a lot of like shaman type personalities, and that stuff can open you up to a lot of different things. And going through something like that, chemo, and then losing one of your gonads, I jokingly say Odin's meatball, and an Odin eye experience. An eye to me is a little bit more important, but I guess someone could debate that. But that was pretty much the catalyst. What got you into this subject initially?
Well, it's kind of interesting you say that, because I think that there's some truth to that for sure. Having interviewed a lot of people, sometimes there is an event which kind of turns a person's life upside down, which sends them seeking, and this sort of opens them up to all kinds of stuff. And that's absolutely true in my case, which for me, I mean, I usually pin it down to November 17, 1986, but it goes actually a little bit farther back to that. In 1984, my mom passed away. She was 49 years old, so pretty young, and it was totally unexpected. And I was a complete skeptic of anything paranormal, life after death, ghosts, UFOs, all of it. So as you can imagine, it hit me pretty hard. I was 19, pretty young myself. So that's kind of what started me really questioning everything and really kind of seeking answers and started having some weird experiences in terms of like dreams, which kind of developed into out-of-body experiences because I really wanted to know if there was life after death. That took a few years, but yeah, November 17, 1986 was really when it opened up for me, because there was this news story about a pilot over Alaska who'd seen a UFO. And well, he wasn't the only one. His whole crew saw it. There was, from what I understand, ground witnesses. It did appear on radar, both on the plane and on the ground, though the FAA later denied it and called it split images. It was a very intense, long sighting where this two craft actually paced this Japanese commercial airliner for many miles, despite them requesting a course change and trying to shake it. This thing still followed them. Now, the news report was probably 2 minutes long, very joking, not serious really at all. But I do remember they showed the pilot, and I thought, that poor man is deluded. He's lying, he's misperceiving. He can't be seeing UFOs because UFOs aren't real. This is what I was thinking. But I was still really skeptical of all things like this. But I remembered my older brother Mark had said he'd seen a UFO, which was probably about 8 years before that or so. I was maybe 12, 13 years old. And so, yeah, 7 years. And all I remember back then was him coming into the house and screaming, saying, I saw this thing and it was really low. And I'm like, yeah, sure you did. And I didn't pay attention to it. But now hearing about this pilot, I decided I'd ask him again. And he described this amazing sighting, really detailed, of your classic flying saucer. Well, kind of saucer shaped. He said it had a dome on top. It had round lights, colored lights around it. Totally silent, treetop level. Chased it in his car. A really impressive sighting. I'm like, man, why are you kidding me? He's like, no. My two friends, Phil and Greg, were with me. You should ask them. I knew them pretty well. They were his friends. And I called them up. And they absolutely were excited to talk about it and verified his story. So that kind of like got me thinking. And I started asking other people and found out that my soon-to-be sister-in-law had a sighting over Van Nuys Air Force Reserve Base. This is all in Southern California where I was at the time. And she described unusual lights hovering in the sky, moving around in kind of right angles and zipping away. I'm looking at her thinking, are you kidding me? And she's like, well, my friend Adlai was there. You know him. Why don't you want to talk to him? So I did, and he confirmed it. I started finding out a lot of people I knew had really dramatic encounters, friends, family, coworkers, some involving not just sightings, but missing time, or even little gray guys. So that, literally hit home for me. It was a long year of adjustment as I bought UFO books, trying to disprove this. Found out I couldn't. Found out there was a cover-up. Found out, that I was basically being lied to by the media, our own governments, the school system, even, people within my own family were lying by omission. So it made me reevaluate everything. That's how it all began for me. I joined MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. I became a field investigator. they make you take a test. But I thought, well, this will be easy. It's a take-home test. But I got the test, and it was 200 questions and not easy. You couldn't look things up on the computer at that time. This is 1988. So I had to go to the library to, study up on a few subjects. Like there was a section on photography, which was pretty difficult. Meteorology, which I happened to be studying in college, so I was pretty good at that. But astronomy, luckily, that was one of my interests also. So, and a section on UFOs, which I aced completely. I actually did really well on the test. But for about 10 years, I just dove into research, interviewing people, anybody who saw anything. And I was writing articles. I was attending UFO conventions. I was starting to go on the radio and actually television pretty quickly. It kind of fell into my lap. And after about 30 articles, I put out my first book in 1996 called UFO Healings, all about people who've been healed as a result of a UFO encounter. Put out another one after that, UFOs over Topanga, about a wave of sightings in my hometown, 1992 to 1994. Put out another one after that, extraterrestrial visitations, another one, 1 in 40. Started writing about a book per year up to today, now 32 books in, over 100 articles. It's taken over my life, which is something I never asked for this. I was not looking for it. I resisted the subject, but it kind of came at me and hit home. It's in my family. You may know this contact follows family lines. Definitely, it's in my family.
And what are some of the beings that have come up that's in the family line that you know of? Some of the experiences, the beings, what types?
Well, there's a couple of different types. My sister-in-law was the first to come forward. She's the one who had a sighting over Van Nuys Air Force Reserve Base. And it was just a few months later, she was in college, this was late 70s, that she had this sighting with gray type ETs. She didn't tell me this at first. This was, 6 months, a year later, after I'd started picking up all these books. By that time, I'd picked up Bud Hopkins' book, Missing Time, which, by the way, did become a bestseller when it was picked up by a major publisher. But at that time, it was only in hardback by a very small publisher, really hard to find, but it had descriptions of grays in it. Now, my sister-in-law had never heard of gray ETs. And she said she was walking along, she was in college, she saw this abandoned shopping cart, and she wanted it. It was a couple of blocks from her home in Van Nuys. So she set out one evening in the summer of 78 or so, to retrieve this shopping cart. She took her dog, Sarah, with her, and she's pushing this shopping cart down the sidewalk past Stagg Street Elementary School. This is just a little elementary school, and she's right next to the school. There's a big floodlight in the courtyard, and as she's approaching this, front area, she saw what she thought were two children sitting right under the floodlight. She thought, well, that's odd. It's nearly midnight. What are two kids doing out at this hour? That doesn't make any sense. And she's looking at them, and they looked really strange. Very pale skin, green jumpsuits, big bald heads, and they were close together, almost kissing, it looked like, but not. She's like, well, this is really strange. Could they be wearing costumes or masks? But that didn't make sense. It wasn't anywhere near Halloween. So she, not thinking too much, but staring at them. And she's about 10 or 20 feet away from them, now right next to them, basically. She says they were hovering about an inch or two off the ground. It looked like, she's not sure. She says that because they seemed to just turn, like opening a book, and looked right at her. And she saw instantly these were not normal humans, because she started describing the classic gray. I know what grays look like, having read Bud Hopkins' book, and of course Travis Walton, Betty and Barney Hill, and all the others that were out at that time, which really weren't a lot. So she's kind of going, I'm like, describing to me, she's going from top to the bottom. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if she starts saying they have pale white skin and no mouth, and I was predicting what she was going to say. And so that to me was a kind of aha moment. I'm like, she absolutely is honest. She's a very careful observer. She's an artist. She's got a almost eidetic memory. So that really shocked me. I'm like, what did you think they were? And she's like, I honestly have no idea, but it scared the daylights out of me. And she didn't want to panic, so she just kept walking. Her dog never paid any attention to them. Kept walking, ditched the shopping cart because it was slowing her down, and walked straight home without looking back. She got no communication from him, nothing like that. But that was like, wow. And then my other sister-in-law, or soon-to-be sister-in-law, also was reluctant to speak at first, but later told me, this was a year or two in to me investigating. She's like, well, I did see little beings when I was 10 to 12 years old. She shared a room with her sister. They both saw them. She has more memory of it than her little sister, who was pretty young. But she said that for over a period of 2 weeks, these little blue troll-like beings with cloaks and hoods and flat faces and stubby fingers and bluish skin would come into her room and told her not to be afraid. We're just recording your memories. And they would take these little kind of long, thin pencil-like rods and press them up against the soles of her feet, which she could feel that didn't hurt or anything. She wasn't scared. She felt like they were her friends. And every night for 2 weeks, they came, and just one night didn't. And that's basically the extent of it, other than after they disappeared, she and her little sister walked to the end of the driveway and looked up at the sky and called out, take us home, we don't belong here. Her little sister only remembers vaguely seeing humanoids coming out of the closet. But it's confirmation. And then I found out that that sister-in-law who saw grays, later her son had a very close-up UFO sighting, and following that had a humanoid, a glowing blue, kind of light being type entity come into his room. He almost forgot about it, but I would remind him every year, like, make sure you don't forget this. So yeah, I never got a chance. My father didn't believe in this stuff. He was repulsed by it, wouldn't talk about it. Never did read one of my books to the day he died. My mom had passed earlier, so I never got to ask her. My grandparents had passed too, so I don't know if it goes back generations, but in front of me, but definitely behind me it is. So yeah, my brother Mark, my 2 sister-in-laws, 2 nephews. So, and then of course I started having some really close-up sightings myself. So definitely it's in the family, but different types of beings.
What were some of your first initial experiences, or if you could tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, well, the first thing I did when I found out like this is real and heard about missing time, I examined my past and couldn't find really anything. I did have a fascination with disasters from a very young age. I wonder about that, because that is a very common theme in onboard UFO encounters. ETs will warn people about the future Earth changes, which really was kind of an obsession of mine from a very, very young age, 7 onward. I was always reading about any kind of disaster, whether it's earthquake or tornadoes or tsunami or hurricane. So I wonder about that. And then, and this kind of came to me much later, but there was an incident around age 9 or 10 where, there's 6 kids in our family. So while we weren't rich, we weren't desperately poor either. I mean, there was enough food, but you did not miss a meal because there wasn't a whole lot to eat. And one day, I'll never forget this because it was really upsetting. I was in my room and came out to eat lunch, and lunch had passed. It was like 3 o'clock or something. I'm like, why didn't you guys call me for lunch? I'm like, we did. You weren't there. I'm like, I've been in my room the whole time. What are you talking about? Said, no, you weren't. You weren't in your room. I'm like, yes, I was. So that would, looking back, I wonder about that too. So there's a few little things like that, but really, I really wanted to see UFOs after finding out it was real. I'd interview people. I'd be like, can I come over to your house? I want to camp in your backyard, because I knew from experience that encounters often happen over a period of 2 or 3 days even. So someone had a sighting that was recent, I would be there. I was going to hotspot locations. I wanted to see one so bad. And I started to see some anomalous lights and stuff, but weirdly, finding out UFOs were real made me really skeptical and discerning of anything. And an anomalous light was cool, but it wasn't a spacecraft. It wasn't. If it was at all ambiguous, I tended to just, be a little bit, not angry, but I don't even know quite the word for it, but I didn't want to believe it was a UFO unless I knew for sure. So finally that did happen in let me see, this would probably be July 20th or thereabouts, 1992. This was when a big wave of sightings was going on in my hometown. I had just moved out into a condominium, a 3-story condominium in Canoga Park, which neighbors Topanga Canyon, where this whole wave of sightings was going on. And I was investigating it and having, really obsessed about it, interviewing all these people. I gave my number to the police. They were referring me callers. I was putting up flyers. I was cold calling people. So it was taking up a lot of my time and energy. And on that evening, I'd gone over to visit my brother Mark's house in Woodland Hills, just a few miles away from where I lived, and just to talk about UFOs, because they were helping me through it, he and his wife. And it got late. So approaching midnight, this was a Sunday, as I recall. I'm like, I have to work tomorrow. I'll see you later. And I got in my little, it would be my Daihatsu little white car, little Japanese car, and was driving down their street, Galandrina, which is a tiny little, pretty much 1-lane street. And coming around this hairpin corner, right about to hit the main street of Canoga. And this hairpin corner is very steep and very tight. So you have to slow down to about 3 miles an hour. And I was creeping around it when something caught my eye from above and to the right. And it was probably a couple of 100 feet up. This, what I thought was a bird at first, was swooping down towards my car. And I realized instantly this wasn't a bird because it was glowing and it was round. So now I'm thinking firecracker. But no, 4th of July was just about 2 weeks past, I remember. So I'm like, this can't be a firecracker. Besides, it came right down in front of my windshield and stopped right over the hood of my car. And it was a little ball, yay big, but like a little bit bigger than a golf ball or a ping pong ball, but definitely close to tennis ball size, a little smaller, but absolutely a solid looking glowing object. Not brilliant, but definitely white yellow, and kind of hovering there, not stock still. It was kind of like wavering a little bit, and it went to my left, went all the way past to the right, and all the way back to the left, and came back and stopped again right in front of me. And I'm thinking, well, that's not a reflection either. I'm going through all these, what could this be? And it was clearly intelligently controlled. I got a sense that, it was aware of me. Even, it's a little thing, so there's clearly nobody inside of it, but I felt like I was being watched, which, I think I was. At any rate, this was just a few seconds long, and then it moved forward, dipped down, it almost touched the asphalt on the road, and then went straight up. And I remember gripping my steering wheel. The car was stopped at this point, and watching it disappear straight upwards. And then I forgot about it. I don't remember driving home. I didn't remember the sighting at all. it completely left my mind for a couple of months. I'm not exactly sure when it popped back in. It was later that year. I'm like, hey, what? I remember seeing this thing. And having had a number of sightings over the years, quite a few of them actually, and some much closer encounters, I always write them down. I always call someone up. I'm like, hey, this happened. Can you believe this? I didn't do that. It took me a little bit to realize that's a classic case of missing time. But it was not long after that I was starting to have dreams of, being on board a craft. And that year I ended up having 3 more sightings, 3 or 4 that same year. And it pretty much ramped up from that point on.
The balls of light and the spears get really interesting. I've had several of those experiences, and I've also had Itzhak Berry, this guy from Intertraditions Shamanism, say that he said that the dead can travel in balls of light, but there's just so many different ways and theories about the spears and balls of light, just trying to figure it out. But I know some of the beings of light that I've seen, I've wondered if they can turn into that. And not to say obviously everything could be every encounter is different as to what it could be, but the spears and stuff, I've seen some red and blue type ones as well in the heavens. And a friend told me that it seemed like I was attracting it there on some level, and it was like just weird, like energy. Just very strange.
I think some are spirits. I think some are, ET probes, perhaps. That one felt mechanical to me. But, I can't say for sure. I've seen what I would call, little tiny orbs, which I felt were kind of spirits. And there was one time I went to see a channeler, and I was talking to my sister-in-law and another lady who's a contactee. And we're just chatting, waiting for this person to channel higher spirits, I guess. And as I'm talking, I see this weird ball of light about the size of a big, big marble come down at a diagonal between us. But it had this weird interdimensional quality that I'm like, God, am I even seeing this thing? But I'm tracking it with my eyes as I'm talking to them. And my sister-in-law screams out, I see it too. I see it too. And so did the other lady. And I'm like, oh my God, you can. Okay, because I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. No, we all 3 saw it. It was weird. I don't know what that was, but it felt like a spirit.
Yeah, the being of light thing for me seemed to be around my dad's death, and I think it was him trying to maybe show himself or something. But definitely just one of the big experiences down here in Florida that I had, that God, you always forget the years and how long it's been. And like, I don't even remember the year it was at this point. I think it was about 10 years ago. I was inside and I had some kind of like watchword thing on DVD, Bible playing or something, because I was trying to get, negative things away from me or whatever. And something told me to go outside and look towards the house. In my head, it was just a thought. And I've had that happen before with UFO stuff. Like something's like, go outside and look. You're like, it's cold, I'm not going. But then you do it and something happens. I've had that happen several times. But this particular time, I turned towards a house on Silver Lake, and I was completely sober. And my dad died. I experimented with drugs. It lasted a few years. And to this day, the only thing I do now is weed. Thank God for that. And it's legal in Florida. But at that particular moment, I had nothing. I was completely sober when I saw what I saw. And it was 2 people made of light, as if they were in my home and they were leaving. And they must have flew through the roof, it looked like. And they just flew straight into the heavens. And they had no facial features or, I didn't know if they were male or female. It was just like energy, but shaped as beings of light is the best way to describe it. And I always think of Cocoon and Ron Howard and all that stuff. That's what it reminded me of. But and I've come across some other people that have seen beings of light. I know there's some book called The Afterlife of Billy Fingers. I think her name's Annie Kagan. It's a really good book on the afterlife where she sees some beings of light as well after her brother died. So I think it's definitely a connection. And I've seen Artie Six Killer Clark in one of her books say that, there are beings of light who are alien races. And there's some story about a handprint or something. It's a native story, and the beings of light returning to the earth. It's in one of her books. And there's just lots of different perspectives on it. I mean, it could be all of the above. But does beings of light come up a lot in a lot of your studies?
Yeah, I would say the grays are by far the most common with people I talk to. Human-looking ETs, mantids, little blue beings, tall whites, and definitely beings of light. That does turn up, and it's confusing sometimes because some of these do sound like your typical apparition of spirit visitation. Others sound like they could be even angelic, and some definitely ET-ish. I always have to go through this big long list of questions trying to determine what's going on with people, because some of this stuff comes all at once. I mean, you can be seeing ETs and start having all kinds of poltergeist activity or have a near-death experience, and that's what opens you up to more experiences. So it can be a little confusing, I think, not only for experiencers, but for researchers as well, trying to unpack and categorize all of this stuff. There's several different types of beings of light, I guess is what I'm trying to say. At least three, I would say, main categories: angelic, as well as just your typical spirits or ghosts, and of course, ETs. When someone sees a landed craft and beings of light come out, that's pretty cut and dry. But yeah, your experience sounds really interesting, because it sounds like with you seeing orbs and having different types of experiences, there's a lot going on. So that makes it more difficult to, figure out. But yeah, beings of light do turn up pretty consistently.
Yeah, and you said something about hooded beings earlier. That was another one of my experiences. I saw some hooded beings, and this was in Georgia with a friend of mine, and he saw them as well. And there was three hooded beings in the woods, and they were very small. Like, I don't know, maybe 3 foot, 2 or 3 feet. That's what it seemed like anyway. And they were just there. It was like they were watching us, and you couldn't see their faces or anything. It was just like three weird cloaked beings. And I always say Jawas, but they were skinnier than Jawas. But the weirdest thing about them was there's a black box in front of them. And that's what I've talked about that a lot on the show, and trying to figure out what it was.
How big was it, this box?
It was at their feet. It was kind of maybe like a soccer ball at their feet, but no, maybe a little bigger than that. The size of it. I'm trying to thinking about like arm's width. It was at their feet, but it wasn't large, that's for sure. It was kind of, say, medium-ish, smaller for sure. And I've always tried to figure out what that black box is. Some kind of device that they use to travel, or a recording. I jokingly say Satan's webcam. I've seen Phantasm too, with the little dwarfs running around. Yeah.
Because the black box does turn up in a number of cases that I've researched, and it's certainly all over in the literature. I do wonder
about that. What's some things you remember about the black box?
Well, I do remember one lady I interviewed as a little girl had that experience with grays, who were holding a black box and had set it on a table and kept asking her to get pitchers of water or glasses of water to apparently do something with it. That was one. She never really did quite figure out what that was. Another case, a lady, two sisters were having encounters, and one time one of these beings appeared in the closet and was holding this black box. I don't know exactly what's going on here. I did talk to contactee Dolly Safran,
that gave me the chills when you said it.
She says it's a device that helps, I think, if I remember correctly, with the atmosphere, that they're using it to sort of uh, enrich the atmosphere or cleanse it or do something that helps them breathe.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that's definitely a possibility. Her case is so amazing. She's kind of my go-to gal when I have a question because she's kind of been there and done that.
Cool. I see her in the chat. Yeah, definitely. One of the other things that I've mentioned that happened during that is a black cat jumped towards them and they vanished. And me and the friend saw that as well. And at that time, I had been reading a lot of Celtic kind of other world kind of stuff like that. So sometimes I think you can draw stuff to you by just reading that kind of stuff. Like some of those books get pretty weird and out there, some of the Celtic other world stuff. So I remember reading some of that kind of stuff. So I've always thought maybe it was in that realm of fairy or something. But I mean, I don't know.
That kind of came to my mind too when you were describing it, because I've looked into that, and the accounts of little people, so-called fairies, elves, gnomes, dwarves, leprechauns, kobolds, you name it, are in pretty much every culture on this planet, going way back, very well authenticated, some of them, and usually very short, anywhere from 1 foot to 3 feet, 4 feet. How tall were these guys that you saw?
I'd say about 2.5 or 3. They weren't very tall. They were smaller for sure. I know I've seen those. I know there's a lot of controversy about those little Greer mummies and stuff and him and all that. But for some reason, those things reminded me of what could be under it. But I mean, I don't know what the story, if those were little mummies or human or what. But that's what, when I saw those little, the little pics or the clips of that stuff, I was like, I wonder if that's what was under those cloaks, I don't know. But I don't know.
Because the cloaks do come up in a number of ET encounters as well, where people will see grays. My sister-in-law, that's what she described as these hooded beings wearing cloaks. I had the same exact description from a guy in Texas who had these little blue beings come in wearing cloaks and carrying little wands. My sister-in-law is an artist. Both of them are. I worked very closely with her over the years. She draws ETs for me and UFOs, working directly with the experiencers. So I'm like, draw what you saw. She drew it in great detail. And this guy from Texas contacted me because he saw that drawing and lost his mind. He's like, that's exactly what I saw. It looks very much like those troll-like beings that Whitley Strieber had in his movie Communion. Very much like that. So perhaps that's what those were. You didn't see a UFO with it, so it's hard to say.
Yeah, I had some UFO sightings, but not on that particular day. I mean, who knows? There might have been one up there and they were beaming down from it or something. I don't know. But it's interesting about the cat
too.
Yeah. And why would the cat make them vanish? You think they could just get rid of that or zap it or something. But yeah. And my friend saw it as well. And there's another time. It's interesting too how friends over the years, some remember these experiences, but others act like they've been brainwiped. And I remember it, but you don't remember that. Like there's one experience where I saw a pyramid craft over some power lines with my friend, and he saw it. We both agreed that we saw it, and a ball of light came out of it. And it's one of those situations where I don't remember much more. So I'm like, is that when they took me or whatever? Because I don't really remember anything but that. But he doesn't remember it at all. So that's something that
I've had that a couple of times. I was once a fairly large group of people doing a CE5 kind of meeting. And this was during the day in Wickenburg, Colorado, I think is where it was. And this light is moving across the sky, a brilliant, bright white light in the daylight sky. We're all kind of looking up at it. And this was actually with Stephen Greer. He was heading this group. There was 20 of us. And he's like, oh, yeah, well, don't label it. It could be a plane, but we don't know. We just call it unknown. And I'm kind of looking at it as he's talking. And suddenly this darn thing flashes a brilliant prismatic red, like it exploded almost, and disappeared. And everyone, I remember, went, oh my God, and me included. And then he just kept talking, and everyone kept, listening to him. And I'm like, wait a second, are we not going to talk about this? And I didn't want to be the one who's like, hey, let's, what did we just see? So I just kind of like, okay. And later, I had a good friend who was sitting right next to me. He does not remember it. I know another guy who was a MUFON field investigator, a doctor, does not remember it. I asked one other person, nope, did not remember it. Makes you feel a little crazy because I know what I saw. I was there. I remember it in vivid detail. It was unusual because the thing just disappeared. It should have, we would have seen something. It was weird.
Yeah, and it's interesting how this stuff affects us over the years. Like, there is some PTSD and stuff. Like, I think I have some issues from some of it because I can remember being inside and being scared that something was, or scared to go outside because something would take me. And I don't remember being taken. That's just it. I don't remember anything like that. But there was one time in Georgia, and funny enough, it was on Bermuda Street. There was some lights in the windows, and it was almost like there was a UFO in the sky. Even neighbors saw it, but there were some weird flashing lights in my windows that was some kind of being, and it terrified me. And it was like, I don't know if they had like little head visors that flashed, but they were all up like weird, like in the windows, and it was flashing, very odd flashing. But there is some stuff that definitely, and there's one time that there was a possible military thing that happened, but I'm not sure exactly what it was. They didn't talk to me directly, but in Henry County near that raceway, when I was having a lot of UFO experiences with witnesses, some kind of craft came over my house that was like, the best way to describe it is like a helicopter with no noise, or like more like a weird cockpit, kind of helicopter-ish, but I didn't see any blades on it or anything. And it was a man was in it, and he looked like he was wearing some kind of like air pilot kind of stuff, like military, like you'd see on a TV show or a movie or something. And it just sat there, and the guy waved mockingly and shot away. And that was at a point where I was having we were outside looking at the UFOs. Like, we were outside, and at one point police told us to go inside, that we were not allowed to look at the sky. And we just went inside because we didn't want to get arrested. But it caused a commotion that we were out there looking at the things that we were seeing. And there's even one particular encounter where my mom saw something with me, and it scared her so bad. She said, "Oh my God, Jeffrey." And I remember her clasping my hand. She remembers it, but doesn't really like to talk about it. But basically, it was some pyramid craft that seemed like they were coming out of like a portal in the sky. It was like orangish green energy in the air, and it was like these three pyramid. It was the type that was over the power lines. That was the same area that these experiences happened in. So it was like a pyramid craft. And I don't know if they're aliens. It could have been some government weird. It could have been reversed alien stuff. I don't know who was driving it, but it looked very sci-fi and weird, like something out of Star Wars or Star Trek or something. And when you see it, you always want to see more of it. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's funny to me because people will have an encounter and it kind of traumatizes them a little bit, and then they want to do it again. It's like, okay. Whenever I've seen something, it's always been thrilling and exciting, and I've never had any fear associated with the stuff I've seen. But having talked to people who've been pulled on board and had it's often very scary for people. It sometimes takes a couple of encounters before they start to move past the fear. Some never do, but it can be very, very disconcerting, to say the least, when something unexplained happens. Because people go through, people don't instantly say it's a UFO. They want this to be normal, and they're overlaying, like, what could this be? Like I said, was it a helicopter? And you realize, well, it's not making any sound, and there's no rotors, and that's when the fear starts to step in. Because I think the unknown, for some reason, just scares people, which is why I always encourage people, write it down, do all the research you can. Once you start to make this a known subject, that's when you can start to move past the fear, because you kind of know what to expect.
Wham, who is the lady that did the documentary from Canada, Dorothy something with the, what was the name of it?
Dorothy Izot.
Are you familiar with her at all? That's pretty interesting. A lot of phenomenon caught on video, and well, that was a book and a documentary, wasn't it? That was a pretty weird, like just watching that documentary. What was it, Capturing the Light or something like that?
Yeah. Hold on just a second. I can tell you.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. It's interesting because some people seem to draw an enormous amount of UFO activity, almost as if their purpose, their mission is to capture photographic evidence or evidence of some kind. And that seemed to be true in her case, because when someone's that much of a UFO magnet, there's something going on there. And I have to wonder, like, why that person is getting so much, because I've talked to a lot of contactees, and it's very, very rare that they capture anything on camera, even if they're walking around with a camera hoping to capture something.
Capturing the Light is the name of the documentary.
Yeah, I saw that. I was just like, wow, I was flabbergasted by that. I bought her book. I still need to read it, but that was pretty flabbergasting. There were some similarities with some of my stuff. It's interesting when the similarities show up, for sure.
Yeah, most of the stuff that she captured, as I recall, was pretty much just lights.
No, it wasn't just lights. I mean, it was at night. Usually it was at night, but it was they were also lights during the day. And there were, I mean, depending on like when it occurred and what she was taking it with, it's really clear that some of the lights were connected to craft of one type or another. You know, in other words, they were emanating from an apparently solid sort of object, but one of the features of even the objects were the different patterns of lights that the objects would exhibit, and there were some interesting features of the light. So that, for example, if she filmed, say, an object with lights moving across, from left to right, say, and she was taking it with 35 millimeter film, say, I'm just using an example, then once it was developed, oftentimes if you would go frame by frame, you would have these bizarre light effects on the different frames, so that it wasn't continuous. It'd be like you could see what she had filmed on one frame, and the next frame there would be all of these lights that would seem to suggest that what was happening was whatever she was filming was actually sort of pulsing in and out of the visual spectrum of what the camera could pick up, and it would vary a lot. And I think that the best part of the documentary for me is that the documentarians are there trying to get they're just wanting to get sort of a profile of her, and as part of that they're talking to members of her family, because she had a fairly large family, a number of children and a number of grandchildren, and then her sons and daughters-in-law, and nieces and nephews and stuff. And so they decided that they would have several sessions where members of her family would come and just talk on the camera about things that about their mom, and the influence of their mom's experience on them, things like that. And they talked to this one daughter who I think it was her eldest daughter, who had herself actually seen some of the same things that her mother had seen, but only when her mother was present. And so it was at night, and the daughter was standing in the kitchen with her back to the kitchen windows. All right, and the kitchen windows were open, so that because it was a warm night outside. This is in Canada. It was a warm night outside, and so they were open, so there was no glass there. In fact, there were no screens actually in the windows that were open. And while she's talking, just being interviewed by the documentarians, while she's talking, this light appears in the sky behind her, and moves across, and moves like from side to side behind her head. And it happens pretty fast, really, given the amount of time they talked to her. And nobody noticed it at the time, apparently, when they were filming, because they were too busy filming her and paying attention to her. But then when they took the film home and processed it and looked at it, they saw it, and did some analysis on it. They actually took the film to experts to see whether it could be a reflection or it could be faked or, whatever. And they determined that whatever it was something that was actually happening outside, because there was no evidence of reflection or anything like that. And so what they did was when they were, after they had completed most of the documentary, they went back to the family and said, remember when we took this footage of you? Well, watch this. And so they showed it to the family. It was the first time the family had seen it, like the whole family had seen it, and realized they all saw it, so they all got this reaction. And so immediately, like two of the sons-in-laws who were kind of skeptics, they jump up and they ran outside and started driving around to see if there was any way that these lights could be faked. Like they ended up spending several days trying to figure out if there was any way that those lights could be faked, but that there couldn't have been. There was no way. There was no way. The direction in which those windows faced, there was nothing that could have produced them. No reflections of headlights. Nothing like that. So it's very interesting, as a family sort of comes to terms with this reality and their grandmother, So anyway, it's a fun film. It's a beautiful film. It's actually more about family and relationships and this woman who's having these really extraordinary kinds of experiences than anything else.
Yeah, it's a good one for sure. And there's it's when you come across something that's good and you remember it. One of my favorite, I love that Dan Aykroyd, David Sarita interview. I watched that a lot. That's on YouTube for free. Dan Aykroyd, UFOs Unplugged. I listened to him on Joe Rogan as well, which I don't listen to Joe Rogan that much, but that episode I happened to listen to. And it's interesting when we talk about these spear craft being scouts or probes or whatever, because when, I said I saw the pyramid craft over the power lines and that came out, that seemed like what it was doing, pretty much like it sent out some kind of scout or something, a probe. I know RD6 Killer Clark has something about in her books about natives and these kind of experiences that some of the native people consider themselves, what is it, water keepers, and they like UFOs come to the water, like some kind of thing like that, and I guess they get water.
Are you talking about in Central America?
I can't remember if it's her native or the Central America book Sky People, but it's one of them. They call them water keepers, like, and they specifically like tend to UFOs like a gas station.
Well, I know that. I can't remember that particular term, but I know that she talks about when she in her book about Central American and Mexican UFOs. She does talk about how there are places where they see these, where the indigenous people see these things all the time, like literally. And so there are places where they see them more often than not. And so they do sort of guard those sites. So maybe that's, I don't remember what they were called exactly, but yeah.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to get into your mind about, Preston, to see what you thought about I don't know. I'm sure I know you've heard Skinwalker Ranch, but if you keep up with the shows and everything, and I don't watch a lot of shows like that, but that one is definitely eerie because it has so many government spooks on it. And I definitely think there's phenomenon happening there because I know some of that's definitely happening. And there's a few of it that mirrors some of the things I've seen, like some of the energy type things. And when they had Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, where they're going to the other ranches, they had that Chris Bledsoe hooked up like the X-Men summoning UFOs with Colonel John Alexander and 2 CIA former military spooks. So that's a pretty creepy episode. I was like, what the hell are they doing? But I'm just kind of curious. Have you kept up with any of that, and what the hell's happening with that? It seems like they're definitely using those shows as some kind of weird tool to do something up to something that's creepy for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit on the fence about it in terms of, how much they're showing and how much of it is absolutely true to, life, because it is a reality TV show and it does seem to be legit. But having been on TV a number of times, I know how they can edit things and sort of
glam it up. They glam it.
Yeah. It's an interesting area because that is the Wichita Basin. And Frank Salisbury, a biologist, was a very early scientist to look into UFOs and wrote a book, The Utah UFO Display, about this area, which is basically neighboring the ranch. But an enormous amount of UFO activity in the Wichita Basin. I suspect there is something going on there. I bought a book on it. I don't know. There's a lot of interesting reports. I'm a bit on the fence about it.
What book are you talking about? Which book?
Oh, gosh. I'd have
Have
to
you
look
seen
it up.
that? Have you seen that? I haven't. I started to read UFO of God. Have you got to that yet? That gets pretty weird. As far as you go to Amazon, it's in the Christian section with 5 stars, and people saying they're having similar experiences from reading the book. And like Colonel John Alexander blurb, you can be one of us or something weird. It's definitely getting weird.
So once he's a nice man.
He's very interesting.
Yeah, I found his case to be pretty interesting. I got interested in it because he had an experience where he was out camping with his son and friends, and at the time he was suffering very badly from Crohn's disease, basically wheelchair bound, and taking an enormous amount of medication just to stay alive, and had an encounter where he was missing, and it was a very well verified in terms of all the people there seeing UFOs in the sky and little beings as well. He didn't really, Chris Blood didn't, as I remember, didn't recall a whole lot of what happened during this missing time, but came away from that experience healed of Crohn's disease, which is extraordinary because that's not the kind of thing you can fake. This is absolutely medically verified, and one of 300 plus cases of people who've been healed as a result of a UFO encounter.
Yes.
So that's what drew me to his case initially. I do have his book, UFO of God. He's a religious guy. I think when someone's super religious, it does have a tendency to sort of, they view their experiences through the lens of their belief system. This is true for every single one of us. And a lot of people I've interviewed, some aren't religious, some are. One guy was very hardcore Mormon when he started having experiences throughout his life. Finally had the Greys come and take his toddler son. And he's like, I'm coming with you. You're not taking my son alone. Yeah. And that was a fully conscious, absolutely benevolent onboard encounter where he was given a tour of the craft and talked to this human-looking ET, and there were Greys as well. But he ended up abandoning the Mormon religion and just became a very spiritual guy, is how he put it. Mm-hmm. And had an enormous number of encounters following this.
That's a rough spot to be in that one, buddy.
Yeah. But I interviewed another guy who is diehard religious, and he ultimately believes they're demonic. Only guy I ever interviewed who actually stuck to that theory. And I've interviewed several hundred. So I think we do have a tendency. One lady, for example, wanted to talk to me because she's like, I think I had some sort of demonic encounter. I'm like, okay, where were you? What happened? She's like, well, I was on the 6th floor of the Marriott Hotel in Woodland Hills. I know that hotel. I know that area really well. It's very densely populated. It's the Marriott Hotel. I'm like, okay, well, what happened? She says, well, the room filled with light and I couldn't move. And there was this figure standing on my bed. I'm like, well, what did it look like? She says, well, I couldn't really see it because it was just a silhouette, but had a really thin body, super thin, and a very large head. I'm like, oh, okay. And she was a good witness because while she thought it was demonic, she just basically reported what she saw without overlaying her own interpretation on it. And after interviewing her in more depth, I'm almost certain this was Gray's, because she did have another encounter as well where a UFO landed in the alley of her, next to her house in Chatsworth, and her boyfriend saw it as well. Her girlfriend had an encounter on the same day. So I'm pretty sure that this was ET as we would think of it. But I think sometimes it's really hard to interpret these experiences. People overlay their own belief system on it.
They definitely seem to be amping up the shows on this stuff, because I watched that Alien Investigation with George Knapp, and it seems like they're taking it to weirder levels, especially with a lot of military on the shows. And he went down to, I don't know if you've seen that one yet, but it's called Alien Investigation, and it's completely done by George Knapp. It's on Netflix. And they go down to, I think, South America, and there's some kind of I forget where, but there was some kind of UFO weird situation where it attacked people there, and the military was involved. And he went down there, and they interviewed a lady that actually had the sores like still on her and stuff. It gets crazy for sure. And then he meets with like top secret government, spooks and stuff. Like, it gets weird. Like, the shows are getting weirder for sure with this when it comes to the government the connection between the military intelligence.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of glad you brought that up, because this is a field which is, littered with disinformation, false narratives, not true actual cases, lies, and what we would call MILABs, military operations. Military abductions is kind of the acronym, but these face peelers of Brazil, I think that was a purely false flag operation to instill fear and paint ETs as the enemy when they're not. I came into this field quite concerned about what's going on here with people being pulled on board and, examined and so forth. I'm like, is this good news for us or is this not? Because the media was painting it as really bad news. And as I started to interview people, this was not what I was hearing. Yes, it was very scary to be physically examined, but I started getting a lot of healing cases. And none of that was being portrayed in the media at all, which really puzzled me, because it was turning up in the cases I was getting. And all the people I was talking to, while some were scared, they would have more encounters, and ultimately they decided, no, they're not here to hurt me. It's not evil. They're not nefarious. In fact, the first thing ETs will say is, don't be afraid. Have no fear. No harm will come to you. We're not here to hurt you. You're fine. And they're pulled on board and examined. Yes, this is where a lot of people interpret their experiences as negative, because it's very scary initially. But this is often when they're healed. And if you don't have fear, this is when you get a lot of the good stuff. Because if you're in pure terror, you'll probably go unconscious, because this is not their intention. And they will put you back, and you'll have a memory of missing time and ETs scaring the daylights out of you. Like, well, this was not good. I didn't like it. But if you move past that or don't have fear, it's an amazing encounter. And having interviewed so many people, it follows a very set pattern. People are taken on board, they're examined. Then this is when the ETs will talk to them and say, well, you have a problem here, we need to fix it. Or what are you planning on doing with your life? We'll basically guide them, counsel them. We'll almost always provide some messages of warnings against nuclear proliferation, and the warnings about pollution and destruction of the environment, things along these lines. But we'll give you a tour of the craft. And for most people that I've talked to, it's a learning curve. It's sort of a curve of learning how to deal with this and understand and remember all of it. But almost all the people I talk to say they wouldn't trade it for anything. It's improved their life. They've woken up spiritually and psychically because of it. The reason I'm kind of going on with this is because our government is painting this as a very negative phenomenon when it's clearly not. If these guys were here to hurt us, we would know it by now. We wouldn't be here. We are the ones who are committing mass genocide, warring with each other, all the division and hate and unequal distribution of wealth. We're the ones with the problems. The ETs are guiding us and trying to wake us up to that we're on the wrong path. That's the theme that is very prominent in these onboard cases. So I don't buy it. I'm sorry. I think it's disinformation.
Yeah, that case, I mean, with the South American face peeler, it just seemed, it was weird. I mean, it definitely seemed creepy, like could be faked for sure. Well, with all the stuff going on right now with Trump and all the war escalations and fears of nukes, they're going to definitely be showing themselves this year. That's for sure. If they're not already, I'm sure they are. It's funny. I don't know if you've ever heard of a guy named Cristo Rupolo. He's the curse of man the curse of the man that sees UFOs. It's a documentary. He's in California and has a lot of UFO sightings. He's been on a few documentaries and stuff, but the main one he's on is Curse of the Man Who Sees UFOs. But he gets video that's really good, like that's just great. But the funny thing is, he calls them names like Mr. Squiggles and Eggplant, or like he names them, and the comedy of that goes over. He names the different types of UFOs, funny names. So you got to definitely keep comedy front and center with this, and try to have a sense of humor about it and not let it, the fear get you. I've interviewed Travis Walton and Thomas Reed together, and Travis Walton said that if you took away fear, it would be a cakewalk. It would be, if you took away the fear, the experience would be a cakewalk as far as, I guess, a more positive experience. And it seems like it is that in the long run. And I know with shamanism and things like that, encounters, fear seems to be a prevalent kind of like a test, like an initiator to overcome. And once you overcome that, you reach a different, a newer level with the encounters.
Yeah, I interviewed a lady. She declined to do a formal interview, but I talked to her in depth. She was having grays come into her bedroom, didn't like it. So they kept coming. Because on some level, she's like, no, don't go away. But on another level, she was interested. And this is a problem for a lot of people. They're like, I didn't ask for this. Well, on some level, you did. Because I've talked to people who've absolutely said, no, go away. And they stop. Their encounters will stop. But sometimes that doesn't happen. So they kept coming back. And one day she's like, I'm done with it. I'm done with the fear. Why are you here? They started communicating. It became very spiritual, interactive. And they actually said, we're so happy. This is a time for celebration. You've come around full circle. There's no need to fear us. And her encounters became entirely benevolent. I've seen that happen in a number of cases. So again, I think the fear is on us. It's not the ET's fault that we're so dead panicked when they show up. We're trained to fear from a very young age. That's part of the problem.
How many times has it come up? I know this has come up with me during experiences where you've gone, oh, SHIT, I'm an alien. That's what it feels like. Oh, crap, I'm an alien.
True question, because I think we all are. I mean,
and you feel like the resident alien guy, Alan Tudyk, with that. I don't know if you've seen that show.
Yeah, I have.
It's really good. There's the comic it came from. I have the comics. Yeah.
It's interesting because obviously from an ET perspective, we're the ETs. I mean, we're aliens to every other being out there in the universe. But I think it's interesting because a lot of contactees basically get the message that they're hybrids, and that essentially all of us here on Earth are hybrids, and that we all share a common ancestry, a common DNA, common heritage with the ETs. Some of, by the way, who look just like us, which raises all kinds of implications and questions. And like that guy in Texas I was telling you about, who saw the little blue beings. He's like 8 years old, and he's telling his parents, "We come from Mars. Did you know that, Mommy? We originally lived on Mars," which I thought was interesting because a number of contactees have told me that. Dolly Stafford, I've brought her up a couple of times, and I wrote a book, Symmetry, about her case. The ETs told her that in no uncertain terms, that yes, we were actually used to live on Mars. This was a long, long, long time ago. But there was a planet-wide, solar system-wide disaster, which ended up us being transferred to Earth after it became inhabitable. So, yeah, I think there's some truth to the fact that we are all ET and probably did not evolve here on this planet. Certainly not like mainstream evolution is describing it.
Oh, trying to keep my dog from making sleep noises. To put him like in a separate room at night. Will you stop it? David, I keep thinking of David Hudgens, that painter. I think that's how you say his name, but Love and Saucers, there's a documentary and stuff. That was a pretty interesting case where he painted a lot of the things. And of course, the sex topic came up a lot, which was kind of weird but interesting. But some of that mirrored some of my experiences. I didn't have any sex stuff, but some of the paintings and the creatures were really eerie. A lot of mantis kind of stuff, and there's even a hairy being. And I think he's from Georgia, or that's where some of this happened, or he moved from it, or something like that. I don't know if you're familiar with that case, David Hudgens, the painter guy. That's a pretty fascinating case.
I love it when there's an artist who has encounters, because then you really get a clear picture from them. Betty Andreasen is a good example. She was able to draw her experiences. There's the Allagash Four, the guys from Allagash. Gosh, is that Wisconsin, Michigan? At any rate, they had an encounter where they were all taken on board, and one of them's an artist, drew it all very clearly. I always love it when there's an artist.
Oh, the Allagash guys. I think they were from Pennsylvania.
At any rate,
you mean the group of guys?
the four guys canoeing.
Yeah.
Allagash River. No, it wasn't Pennsylvania.
Well, it's not. It's not Michigan though.
I forget where it is. Maine. I think it's Maine, actually. Now that I think of it.
Okay, hold on.
What is that?
Just a minute.
Four men were out canoeing in the Allagash River area, and they had a missing time encounter and had to go under hypnosis to recall it. But as there were four of them, and they were all separated and didn't share with each other, they recalled essentially the same scenario. So
essentially, yeah.
It's a very well authenticated case, and Raymond Fowler, who investigated it, is one of my favorite researchers out there. He's very thorough, very objective. So I think
it's in Maine. You're right. It's in Maine.
Is it
I knew it was in the East Coast somewhere over here. So
yeah, one guy I interviewed, his case is in my book, Humanoids and High Strangeness. He had a series of 3 very interesting encounters. You were talking about people who have intimate encounters. He was 25 years old, I think, in Portland, Oregon, and was walking down the street. There were riots going on at the time against this, the Kent State shooting and this Vietnam War and all of this. At any rate, suddenly ahead of him on the sidewalk, he sees 2 7-foot-tall guys dressed in, basically Men in Black type suits. But they're very strange looking guys with very dark eyes, long noses, look almost identical, and in these just sharp black suits. And they're eyeing him. And so he's freaking out. They walk right up to him and started asking him about the protests. He's like, why are they protesting? And he explained that, it's against the Vietnam War. And then they looked at him, said something that really freaked him out. They said, we can take you anytime we want, which really caught him off guard. He did not know what they meant by that, and turned and ran, went home. That was the first encounter. There's 3 encounters on this one day. And this guy's a really interesting guy, apartment manager. And so he goes back out into the city of Portland and is just going to hang out for the evening, and sees this crowd of people in front of a bar that he would go to sometimes. And going up there trying to figure out, what's going on, he sees these two 7-foot tall figures in brown ankle-length robes. With, they were probably the same guys in hindsight, but they were dressed so strangely he didn't connect the guys he had just seen earlier, because these guys were wearing not only ankle-length brown robes, but Nefertiti-like gold hats. Really strange. And we're staring at the crowd and holding out their hands like this in front of them and staring straight ahead. And so he's like, who are these guys? What is going on here? And so he kind of sidles up to them, and he says they were 7 feet tall and 8 feet tall with these hats. And he's like, I like your hats. And one of them said, thanks, or something. And then he's like, what are you doing? And he said, well, we're reading the minds of the crowd. He's like, oh, really? Why? He says, because we need to figure out what's going on. He's like, well, I'll figure it out for you if you want. And one of them turned and looked at him. He says his eyes were real, just had whites, of course, but black pupils. And just a very odd, very pale complexions, something off about them. And so he goes into the crowd, and it's a fight that's starting. It turns out it's one of his friends who's in the fight, but just got out of the army. And so he breaks it up and turns around, and those two figures are gone. He's like, God, who were those guys? Because also what was really weird is nobody was noticing them, and they stuck out like sore thumbs. So that was just odd and peculiar. So he's walking home after, having a drink or two at the bar. He's walking home, and suddenly this lady appears next to him, an attractive woman, normal height, but she's wearing that same darn brown robe the other guys were wearing. And she turns to him and says, I need to have sex with you. He's like, what? He's 25 years old, a young man. So he says, it's my lucky day. She was an attractive woman. He said she was a little odd, though. Her hair was perfect, not a hair out of place. And she just, very pale complexion, a pretty lady, but acting peculiar, and didn't say a word as she followed him home.
That's peculiar, yeah.
And they immediately became intimate without another word. And I won't get into the details because, boy, he did. I put it in my book, but it's very graphic. When he started to describe her anatomy as being quite different from a normal person in a couple of areas. And one I can talk about without being too graphic is he was kissing her neck, and he said her skin was not normal. It felt different. He says it wasn't rubber, but it was a little rubberier. Just, he had a hard time describing it. And she started talking to him telepathically, and that completely freaked him out, but they're already in the moment. So he's just going with it. And because she was instructing him, like, don't do this, do that. And it was all very odd. And quite quick. And then she gets up, she puts on her robe, she turns around and looks at him, and he had this flash of her looking quite different with a bald head, completely bald head.
Oh my
God. And she walked right out the door. And he says, I don't know why I didn't chase after her. I didn't know why I said a word. She didn't say a word. The whole thing was odd.
Wow, that is a trip for sure.
Yeah.
We've had Bigfoot sex shows, so you just have to be careful.
I mean, I could get into more detail, but
yeah,
it's in the book.
I don't need
It's
any.
embarrassing. I was really surprised. I'm like, wow, this guy, he's letting, he was very courageous to let this all just hang out. But he does think it's UFO related because 10 years later, 15 or so, he was living in the San Francisco area, became a ham radio enthusiast, and was up in the mountains above San Francisco Bay, playing with his ham radio, when suddenly this blazing light comes down over him in his car. He's sitting in his car. So he gets out of his car, and there's this huge craft. And it's shining lights down on him. It's totally silent. And he's on the ham radio with another guy. So he reaches into his car and says, do you see, because he was in line sight on Devil's Mountain, I think it's called, some miles away across the bay. He's like, do you see a bright light above a mountain here? He's like, yeah, I see it. He's like, that's me. That's where I am. I'm looking at this UFO. He's like, oh my God, I see it. I see it. So he puts the radio down and turns and looks at this thing and blacks out. And the next thing he knows, the UFO is right over him. So there was a missing time or something going on here. When he blacks out again, it's back over the hill, just a short distance away, and zip, it zips off or disappears. He says it moved so fast. And that's all he remembered, except waking up the next morning, forgot it completely. Did not remember the sighting at all, but started having these very vivid, realistic dreams, which were very much continuous narratives. Dreams are very all over the place. But this was always the same. He's on board this craft. He's laid out. There's these really kind of, he said, scary looking grays looking at him and physically examining him. And he drew them for me. Do a really good drawing. He was an artist as well. And after this dream happened like 3 or 4 times every single night without change, he remembered the sighting. It all came flooding back. It's like, oh my God, I think I was taken on board. So he essentially remembered a good portion of this, because he had like 3 hours of missing time. He did remember coming back, and it was real late. But to me, what's super interesting about his case is that following this, he became super interested in electronics and started building computers and transmitters and all. He says, I have a high school education. I should not know this stuff. And he was rebuilding computers and making them better, faster, stronger. And not only that, he says his psychic abilities went off the charts. He started having full-on telepathy where he could read people's minds. So he started playing with it and testing it. And he said he tested it over and over again, and it was correct. And he started playing with it more and realized he could influence people's actions. And that was another thing he played with for a little while, but being a very moral and ethical person, he's like, I'm not doing this. This is not an ability people should be, using to influence people. But he says he did it over 100 times just to make sure he wasn't losing his mind, that this was actually real. And I have to believe him, because this is something I've heard with so many people. I've mentioned it before. An encounter wakes up your psychic abilities to an unbelievable degree that I'm pretty sure this is one of the ET agendas. One of the reasons people are being contacted. They want to wake us up to our own psychic abilities.
Yeah, and when I first started doing the show, me and a guy named Jeremy Vaney used to do these little interviews with people where they would just come in a chat room and type, and there was no audio. Like, that was a long time ago, but I call those AOL old school interviews. And Stanton Friedman was actually there. I had to be on the phone with him the whole time because he didn't know exactly the tech details. So I stayed on the phone with him while he was there typing, and they would type a question in the chat room and he would type the answer. And then it morphed into this and everything. But at one point I was having trouble getting interviews, and I said a prayer and had a UFO sighting, and ended up on a radio show, and kind of led to a lot of different things. And then I started, getting interviews with like Stanton Friedman and Jim Mars and all these big, people that I'd seen in documentaries that I'd never thought would give me the time of day. And basically, I think a lot of this is about raising consciousness. Shooting catapults at the wall, the veil, so to speak, to open it up to different levels. And that's what we do, and certainly what you do. But I think there's something to that for sure. The positive angle with the healings and all that. I definitely think there's something to that, but that's a big part of it, right? Raising consciousness.
Absolutely. Because I see it. It's the rule rather than the exception. It's a very, very rare person who's been taken on board and doesn't have something along the lines of out-of-body experiences, accounts of telepathy, clairvoyance, hands-on healing, remote viewing, precognition, psychic reading, seeing shadow people, mediumship, right down the line, even to physical levitation. I did a whole chapter on my book. This just blew me away. In Not From Here, Volume 5, about people who had started levitating following their experiences, because this kind of came to my attention when I read an account by Jacques Vallée, who had interviewed a doctor who had essentially a missing time experience, and following that had not only a healing, by the way, he was healed of a partial paralysis and an a wound on his foot, but levitated twice, actually marking the ceiling, and very well authenticated. Two accounts of physical levitation. And I remember, well, gosh, that happened to Whitley Strieber. He reported that. I'm like, wait, Stephen Greer said he had that happen to him twice. So I started going through the literature, and I found a number of cases of this. And after collecting like a dozen of them, I'm like, this is absolutely an after effect. I ended up writing a full book on levitation, human levitation, it's called, and documenting some 300 cases all over the world, which, by the way, has been proven in a scientific laboratory on at least 4 or 5 occasions, the ability to physically levitate. It's very well authenticated, very widely observed, absolutely true, and is connected in some cases to people's having their psychic abilities woken up as a result of a UFO encounter.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. We were talking about all the weather stuff earlier. For some reason, I thought of that book PK Man by Jeffrey Mishlove. And there's a lot of complexities with that story, but there's definitely a weird weather tie-in to a lot of things. It gets weird. They should do a movie about it for sure.
Yeah, I'd watch that. Ted Owens. I've got the book. Really interesting because he did levitate twice. Once he was, as a kid, went on the diving board, jumped on the diving board and went up and hovered for about 10 seconds in the air while the kid standing next to the pool is like, oh my God. And he crashed into. He's like, how did you do that? He says, I don't know. It just happened. And then another time when he was on a Navy ship, same thing. He's jumping down from one part of the deck to the other and hovered in midair while a group of 20 officers turned and looked at him like, what the heck are you doing? How is this going on? And he became very well known for predicting sports events, controlling weather, ESP. He had UFO events as well. Something going on with that man, Ted Owens.
Yeah, I interviewed Mishlove a million years ago, which I can't even remember how long it's been, but a long time ago. But that was an interesting story. They should do more with that. That's definitely fascinating. I can't remember exactly what happened to the guy. Do you remember exactly the finale of all that?
I know he passed on. There was some controversy surrounding his case. I forget what it was. I don't think he was ever caught in hoaxing or anything like that, but I think he was like making money or kind of grifting a little bit off of his ability to predict sporting events. Or he said he could influence sporting events, which I don't know. That's kind of a big deal. It's like, saying that you can influence who's going to win the Super Bowl.
Didn't he say he could cause earthquakes or something, or predict them, or something about earthquakes?
I'd have to go back to the book, but I do think he was, his experiences were legit, at least to some extent.
Well, what's some of the things that have influenced you or inspired you that you've come across? Like, let's say we're talking about PK Man, different maybe authors or books that were big pivotal points for you. I've read all the Strieber stuff. It's definitely helped some. It would probably be a lot worse if I never read it, for sure. It helped.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember I got in this field in '86. At that time, it wasn't really all that popular. But in 1988, Whitley Strieber's book came out, Communion, which absolutely just went off like wildfire. It broke publishing records. And that's when Bud Hopkins' book Missing Time became a bestseller, and out came his follow-up book Intruders, which also did very well. Gary Kinder wrote a book about the Billy Meyer case, and this became pouring into popular culture in a big way. I kind of rode that wave. It was a perfect time to get involved in this subject. Bud Hopkins was definitely an influence because I read his book and I'm thinking, well, gosh, I'm getting these same exact cases. Exactly what he's describing. These people had not read his book because you couldn't find it at that time. And I ended up, buying everything I could find, of course, on UFOs. I picked up Travis Walton's book. It was called the Walton Incident. This was well before Fire in the Sky. And that one just really gripped me. The Betty and Barney Hills Incident by John Fuller, Interrupted Journey, was a fantastic book. So those definitely affected me profoundly. But for me, I think the true heroes in this field are Jim and Coral Lorenzen, who started APRO. They were the first people to really form a UFO citizen study group of any size and influence. And all the UFO study groups after that, like MUFON or CUFOS, Center for UFO Studies, kind of modeled after them. And I absolutely loved them. They changed the face of UFO research, wrote a series of books, which are highly recommended. They're absolutely a huge influence on me. Love Donald Kehoe. That man, single-handedly, Major Donald Kehoe, fought the UFO cover-up when nobody else would. Not J. Allen Hynek. James McDonald really was the only other guy out there, a scientist, who was also a great researcher, unfortunately has passed on, who is another one I really, really admire quite a bit. So yeah, I've had a number of early influences. I love the older generation of researchers because now there's so many people involved, and some are pretty clearly in it for a buck, or attention, or are pushing a narrative, a fear-based narrative that really is concerning to me. Some are clearly outright hoaxers and have been found to be hoaxers. Some are debunkers. Phil Klass and Donald Menzel were clearly, absolutely just trying to debunk the subject, when I think privately they knew it was real. Currently, I'd say some of my favorite researchers are Timothy Good. It's kind of dropped out of the scene, but I love his books. Above Top Secret, that was a game changer for me. I give it to any skeptic. You cannot read that book and come away like there's nothing to this. Or Clear Intent, republished as the UFO cover-up by Lawrence Fawcett and Barry Greenwood. That was like, wow, okay. I tried to give that one to my dad. He wouldn't read it. I love Michael Schratt. He's a current researcher. He's very active. He's doing excellent work, I think. Barbara Lamb is probably my favorite researcher in terms of on-board experiences, which is where I focus most of my attention, because I think that's where the answers are. You're not going to get them from the government. You're not going to get them from whistleblowers who do. I think there are some legit whistleblowers out there, but some are not. They're clearly being sanctioned by government and spreading false information. It gets under my skin when I heard this recent whistleblower say that we're using psionics and technology and calling ET town and fooling them into thinking we're ET too, and then we're shooting these craft down. No, that could not in a million years be true. For one, ETs are profoundly telepathic and profoundly advanced. You will not fool them. That's just not going to happen, or shoot them down. So I feel like that's false information, whether they're being misled or outright lying, I think is up to question. It's my assessment. I'll get pushback on that, I'm sure, from some people, because I've interviewed some whistleblowers myself who I think are genuine, honest people who really want the truth out. But some of them, I question people who are coming from the intelligence sector and saying stuff that couldn't be true.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff I see in exopolitics. I don't want to judge all of exopolitics, but a lot of it I just kind of turn my nose at. Some of them seem like they should be writing erotica on Amazon with aliens, and it seems like are playing Dungeons and Dragons. I'm not going to say it all is crap, but some of it I definitely, my initial reaction to it is kind of like, oh. But there's a lot of stuff out there. I was trying to think of a title for the show, so I said Ufology Coyote Blues. It's just something that just came to my brain. So definitely fitting to talk about that. And you have to use discernment. And there's so many people coming from so many directions. God, it's exhausting keeping up with it. It's good to hear about a lot of the people that you're keeping up with, though, and stuff, and keeping us up to date on all of this stuff. because we do a lot of different show topics here, but we do UFOs a lot, but there's a lot of different things that we do. I had Neil Donald Walsh Conversations with God on. I didn't even think he'd come on my show, but he did. So we do different things. Yeah, that was a big one. I grew up reading his books, and I liked them a lot. So I've had him on twice, and that's always been great. But what else have you been keeping up with the cases? What do you think about some of this? The drone stuff. I mean, it definitely seems like it's military, probably. There's so many different things I've heard about that, from it's aliens to it's drones looking for nuclear warheads in briefcases. Like, there is definitely a lot of buzz about it. What do you think about the drone stuff?
Yeah, well, I bet, when this began, I just stepped back. I'm like, okay, let's see how this develops, because pretty early on, it looked to me like covert military ops. And the more I see on this, the more I feel like that is what's going on here. I knew when drones came on the scene, like, this is going to be a problem. These drones can absolutely fool people. There's some that are quite quiet. And if you look up drone technology, you'll see it's far more advanced than you probably think it is. And when this drone wave hit, I'm like, well, here we go. What is going on here? Is this a distraction from the congressional hearings that were really ramping up big time at exactly that point and starting to make some real strides towards truth? I'm like, wow, this is unprecedented. We're starting to get some answers here. And then this happens. Also, right coinciding with the election and all of this. That seemed suspicious to me. Another red flag was the media coverage, which almost never will cover a UFO wave, not in any really length or depth or breadth. But boy, did they ever. This became a media frenzy. And also the CGI and the Photoshop and the videos that were coming out on this littered the internet. And I would say a good portion of them were fake, clearly fake, which muddied up the waters to a degree. Like, how can you tell which one is real and which one is not? And people weren't reporting being taken on board and seeing ETs face to face and all the other kinds of encounters you usually hear. When there's a UFO wave, cars being chased down the road by objects, objects with portholes and little beings looking out at you. So I ended up talking with James Goodall, an aviation historian who's quite prominent in this field and very knowledgeable, probably the leading authority on black budget aircraft, along with Michael Schratt, a couple of other researchers. Dolly Safran, I mentioned her before. She's very connected to all of the military. Cheryl Costa, a prominent researcher, also with a military background, all said, no, not ET. I think what we're looking at here with the drone situation is covert military ops. Maybe a tiny, tiny portion of them hobbyists. I don't think so. It's funny because when the governments, we had the FBI, I think it was the FBI, make it an official statement. Could have been this, one of the intelligence agencies, the Pentagon, certainly, and even members of Congress were trying to make, they were coming out of the Capitol and being questioned by the press saying, what do you think these are? And every single one of them was like, I don't know what it is. I want answers to. No one's told me. So we're getting a lot of contradictory answers from various levels of government who are saying there's nothing to it, or it's Chinese, or it could be a foreign power, or maybe it's NHI, another acronym that I'm not a fan of, non-human intelligence. Just lots of contradictions and non-answers, which is another red flag. No, I don't think this is ET. I think it's covert military ops. Either, like they say, they're doing an operation searching for military, atomic stuff, or more likely, I think, a dry run for a false flag, fake ET invasion. And really, I think it's more than anything propaganda to see how people react and insert confusion into this subject to a degree that makes it very difficult for people to figure out what's going on and distracts them from the fact that we probably do have these craft in our possession and the bodies, which is where the conversation was going to pretty strongly when this wave of drones took precedence. I mean, grabbed all the attention, stole the fire and the attention away from the media, which was talking about, the revelations from these congressional hearings, and moved to this. So that's my take on it.
And then you had the congressional hearings on one side saying that this stuff is happening. Then you had like the Pentagon saying, no, it's not. It was just very, very weird. And the one hand doesn't know what the other hand's doing kind of situation. And then you wonder if there's something here that lives here that makes them says, don't talk about us. And that's why they do it. You get paranoid with all that. Is there some kind of they live John Carpenter race here that's controlling them? So there's so many ways to go with it. That
was a good movie. I enjoyed it. No, I don't think I don't see that as being a genuine scenario that we should take seriously.
Yeah. Of course, there's the Antarctica paranoid stuff that something lives there, blah, blah, blah. That's a lot of exopolitics, blah, blah. Kind of a lot of that kind of stuff. But it's definitely weird to see them one side saying one thing and the other side saying the other. Like, it's just contradictory, that's makes them look like idiots.
Yeah, I think that's the whole purpose ultimately, is to make us look like idiots, but ultimately it's backfiring. I think this is why we see steps towards disclosure, because failure to do so will render the intelligence agencies and the highest levels of the military and the military industrial complex and the government, the secret government, whatever you want to call it, the cabal, irrelevant in terms of, or not credible when it comes to this subject. And that's exactly what happened. I don't believe them any longer. I feel like they are absolutely lying and covering up, and we're not going to have disclosure. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, and I keep remembering that book, Wham! Project Identification. I don't know if you've ever heard of that book, Preston. That's pretty interesting. Who's the author of that one? Do you remember, Wham? It's on the archive.org, but it's called
Harley Rutledge.
It's a pretty interesting book about a guy that had some encounters that started to, chronicle it on different levels. That was pretty unique for that time. But it's called Project Identification. But definitely, so we got about 7 minutes or so. So what's on your radar coming up? What do you got planned?
Well, like I said, I'm working on the sequel to Symmetry. That's my favorite book I've written. Onboard UFO Encounters is my bestseller, but Symmetry is such an amazing story because it's a continuous narrative of one person's experiences. And it's an incredible story, which is also interesting because she's backed it up with photographic evidence and medical evidence and corroborating witnesses. And I myself became a participant in her encounters. So we're putting out a sequel, which is going to focus more on the knowledge she's learned directly from the ETs, not only the science, but the psychic consciousness aspect of what the ETs know. I'm pretty excited about it. And also I wrote a whole book on my own out-of-body experiences, which really started around the same time as I started doing UFO research. But I got really good at it and still doing it. So that's going to be another really fun project. I have my own YouTube channel where I put out episodes each week. And that takes an enormous amount of work. But I'm having great feedback from that. And a lot of people don't have time or energy or even the money to buy books, so I'm putting out my research in that format as well, which is a lot of fun. I'm doing my own podcast with Dolly Saffron each Monday evening from 8 to 10 Eastern time, called The Light Gate, and that's another thing that keeps me pretty busy. I've always got projects in the works. I've got another book about supernatural I'm going to be writing. I've got several books I want to put out. But, I'll do it as time permits. I think this is a really important subject. I really do. I'm really pleased to see it moving into the mainstream in such a big, undeniable way. I think now we outnumber the skeptics. The debunkers, goodbye, UFO cover-up. I don't think our governments will ever disclose, but do we even need them to tell us the truth about what we already know is true? Disclosure has happened. There's a worldwide database of more than 1 million recorded, documented cases, reaching back hundreds of years. We don't need our governments to tell us this is real. We know. So I think that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, you can't trust them no matter what you do when it comes to that. I mean, I'm someone that's had UFO experiences, and something showed up on a level that was obviously, of the ability to come in our airspace and show up at my house and them not do anything about it. And then apparently maybe they tried to do something about it when I saw the military craft. Maybe they picked up on their radar on the blip. I think they have like an agency that goes out when a UFO thing comes up. They send out some kind of craft to survey or whatever, and that's what I got a glimpse of. But
within minutes, they're on the ball. They've got stuff that they're watching everything coming in and out. You bet.
Yeah, but the biggest thing is they don't care that people have had these experiences and have trauma from it or whatever. They don't get, it's a joke to them probably, as far as what do they care? They don't. And it's evident when they have the thing happen. The congressional thing was interesting, and I'm glad that happened. But then when the other side says no, this is all bunk. Even it's like the Pentagon even said that there was nothing coming here or something like that, and they even released video of stuff they saw that they didn't know what it was. So it's just weird. Like, it's just crazy behavior. It's like, didn't you release UFO video a few months back? So that's what they did, right? And I know they had those TikTok guys at Skinwalker Ranch, and they have their like own little unit where they do UFO research. That some of the TikTok dudes that experience that. And on one of those episodes, they got sick. One of them got sick or something, and their technology got messed with. And that was interesting, because on these shows, they seem to be painting the picture that there's something here that doesn't want us to know about it, and it's messing with their technology. And like, are we about to drill into their alien base? That was like the last season of Skinwalker Ranch, trying to get through something that could be an alien base. And I don't know if there's another season after that, but they ended it pretty much saying that there's something down there and they don't know what it is, and it could be whatever. I don't know if they ever got any farther than that. I may be behind, but that's definitely weird for shows. But you got to be aware of the glam too, what they add to it and everything. And that's one of the things Travis Walton said, is Hollywood got a hold of his story. And Fire in the Sky, the movie's kind of like it's pretty much a horror movie on a lot of levels. But he said Hollywood got a hold of it, and they do their glam. Yeah, they do their glamming. But
I was on the news once and showing the newscaster where a UFO landed, and there were gopher holes there. And he's like, "Are those landing traces?" I'm like, "No, those are gopher holes." He's like, "Well, would you mind saying that those are landing traces?" And just pointing at it. I'm like, "No, I'm not going to do that."
Wow.
They tried to trick me. Like, would you put your hand in it?
That's so weird.
Unethical. It's like, really, why? Why?
It's like, no, they're
Oh,
anyone can tell they're gopher holes.
I know that guy. For some reason, I'm thinking of Prophet Yahweh. I don't know if you remember him, but that was definitely seemed like some hoaxing. But I found out he died. I don't remember when, but he passed away. But that was some weird stuff where that may have been like a hoax, false flag thing or something. It was weird. I mean, they basically had him on the news summoning UFOs and all this weirdness. But it was definitely
like you said earlier, and I'm glad you put it up. Use your discernment.
Yeah.
Put your thinking cap on when some of this stuff comes out, and really do your research. Yeah, I always advise people, don't look to our government for answers. Go to the contactees. There's a lot of people out there who are having experiences. I think that's where you'll find the truth about what's going on here.
Well, thanks so much, Preston. I appreciate it so much that you've been on the show. A wealth of information and professionalism, and we appreciate it so much. Do you have some links or something you want to give out?
Yeah, if you want to go to my website, you just punch my name in. The actual address is prestondennett.weebly.com. And I have a YouTube channel. Just punch my name in on YouTube. It should take you there. You can find my books on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and other online retailers. I'm pretty easy to reach on social media like Instagram, Twitter, or X, Facebook, and so forth. Reddit, I recently got on. So yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on the show. Like I said, this is an important subject, has the potential to change the world. The truth is going to come out whether the government folks like it or not, because you can lie about the truth, you can distort it, you can ignore it, but you can never destroy it. Truth is truth, and it's going to come out.
All right. Thanks so much. And knock down the walls and flood the floodgates. We definitely need some kind of more positive in this world. It's so weird. It just keeps getting weirder. It snowed in Florida. So the first time I ever snow in Florida, and it stuck. Like it was like it stuck. Like real snow in Florida. I'm in the panhandle, so luckily I get cooler weather, thank God. But we appreciate it so much, Preston, and thanks everybody. You listen to United Public Radio 107.7 FM New Orleans, and stay tuned. I have a lot of interesting guests coming up. Some shows on Native American mounds and all kinds of stuff. Or Friday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern. You can go to churchofmabusradio.com, churchofmabusradio.com, and it goes to our Facebook group. We appreciate it. Everybody have a good weekend. Thanks, everybody. Good night.